Guy Penrod has been one of gospel music's most recognized voices for over 30 years, and after a long, unexplained absence from public life, his wife Angie has finally spoken about where he went and why. That is what this video is about. No scandal, no tragedy, no collapse, just the truth behind a silence that stretched long enough to worry everyone who ever loved what this man gave to Christian music. And that truth, when it came, said more about faith and the cost of a public life than most people expected to hear. A voice like Guy Penrod's does not just fill a room. It reaches the kind of quiet that lives inside a person, the silence that carries grief or longing, or a question someone cannot bring themselves to ask out loud. Audiences who walked into his concerts carrying weight they couldn't name would find, or within minutes of hearing him sing, that something had shifted. That is not a skill taught in any conservatory or sharpened through technique. Training produces singers. What Guy carried was something different, and the people who experienced it firsthand spent years returning to it because nothing else quite compared. His long silver hair and composed expression became as familiar as the voice itself, and the calm, unguarded way he closed his eyes when the music moved him told audiences everything they needed to know about whether what they were hearing was real. What drew people to him beyond the music, though, was the consistency of his character across 3 decades in Christian music. Public life tends to erode people over time, wearing away the edges of whoever they genuinely were before the spotlight found them. But Guy seemed untouched by that process. The man backstage matched the man on stage, and the people who worked alongside him on the road reported the same quality again and again, that his faith was not a branding decision, and his humility was not something he performed for cameras. Fans sensed that authenticity and responded with a loyalty that ran much deeper than ordinary admiration. They brought their children. They prayed for him personally. They followed his work with genuine investment in who he was, not simply in what he produced. And so when the silence eventually arrived, the concern that spread through the gospel music community was not the shallow disappointment of an audience missing its entertainment. It carried the specific weight of people who believed they knew someone and had suddenly lost the ability to find him. The absence built slowly, the way most significant things do. No announcement came, no farewell tour, no public statement addressing a change in direction. One season he was fully present, touring, releasing music, showing up in interviews and on social media with the regularity fans had come to expect. Then, gradually, he wasn't. Tour dates thinned out. Album releases stopped arriving. The photographs disappeared from his pages for stretches that grew longer each time. And when fans refreshed looking for updates, they found nothing. Most gave it little thought at first, assuming a quiet period between projects. But quiet extended into something that no longer had a comfortable label, and weeks became months, and months accumulated into a silence that demanded some kind of acknowledgement that never came. Online speculation filled that space the way it always does. The gospel and Christian music communities began gathering in comment sections and forums, each theory arriving with more confidence than the last. Some believed his voice had suffered permanent damage. Others pointed toward health problems being deliberately kept from the public. A smaller number gestured toward personal or family difficulties, speaking with the certainty of people who had no actual information behind them. None of it was confirmed, and none of it was denied either, which meant the rumors circulated long enough to settle into something people half believed, simply because no alternative explanation existed. The Penrod family held a silence so complete that even the most persistent speculation eventually exhausted itself. Yet the underlying question never went away. It just waited, patient and unresolved, in the background of everything his fans carried forward. The contrast between that silence and everything Guy Penrod had represented made it harder to accept. This was someone who had spent his entire career being transparent about his faith, his family, his beliefs, and the values that organized his life. He had never kept his convictions at a professional distance or managed his image through calculated distance. His audience knew him, or felt that they did, with an intimacy that most public figures deliberately prevent. His withdrawal, then, registered as something more than unusual. It felt like a door closing on a room people had always been welcome in, and without any explanation for why the door had shut, and the worry that followed carried a specific kind of ache. Angie Clark, Guy's wife, finally broke that silence, and the fact that she chose to speak carried its own meaning. Angie had never used her husband's platform for personal visibility. She was known to those close to the Penrod world as a woman of quiet strength who stood beside him without seeking the light for herself. Her decision to address the public was not casual, and the people who had been waiting understood that whatever she had to say was worth hearing on its own terms, not as a response to any particular rumor, but as a genuine act of honesty between a family and the community that had supported them for so long. What she described had no dramatic center, no diagnosis, no crisis, no secret that had been managed quietly for years. Instead, her explanation was straightforwardly human, and in being human, it carried more weight than any revelation could have. After 30 years of performing, traveling, and bearing the emotional responsibility of ministering through music to hundreds of thousands of people, Guy had reached the end of what he could sustainably give. His faith had not faltered. His love of gospel singing had not disappeared. But the constant demands of public ministry, the travel, the schedule, the expectation to always be spiritually present and emotionally available for crowds of strangers, had drained something in him that had not been replenished in a very long time. Rather than continue until something genuinely broke, he made a deliberate choice to stop and allow himself to recover, and Angie supported that decision fully. And she was careful to separate this from the kind of crisis the word burnout tends to imply. What Guy experienced was not a collapse, but a recognition, a moment of honesty with himself about what his life was costing him and what it would cost him if he continued without pause. The decision came from clarity, not despair, and it was grounded in the same faith that had carried his music for 3 decades. The man who had spent 30 years singing about peace had simply decided it was time to live inside it rather than deliver it to others from a stage. Life on the Penrod farm became something neither of them had experienced in years. Without the rhythm of tour schedules pressing against every day, time opened up in ways that the constant motion of a public career had made structurally impossible. Morning walks across their land, long conversations with Angie, prayer without a clock running in the background, and the kind of rest that actual sleep brings, rather than the half-rest of someone already calculating the next departure. Guy began eating well and sleeping properly, and noticing the texture of ordinary days, things the road had long prevented him from experiencing. None of it was dramatic. All of it was necessary. Writing came back to him during this period, but with a freedom the music industry had never allowed. No deadlines, no commercial expectations, no sense that the work needed to perform in any way beyond what it meant to him personally. The songs he wrote came out of stillness and went nowhere except deeper into his own relationship with God. And Angie described this as something that gave him genuine joy, a return to the original reason he had ever sung at all. Not to be heard by the world, but to express something honest about what he believed. That purity, uncomplicated by the demands of a career, was something he had not been able to access in a very long time, and finding it again restored a part of himself that years of professional pressure had buried, Mentoring younger artists in gospel music and Christian ministry became a new form of purpose during this time. Guy began spending real time with emerging singers, sharing not only technical knowledge about performance, but what he had learned about living with integrity inside a public calling. He talked with them about the cost of visibility, about protecting the inner life when public expectations constantly press against it, about keeping faith genuine when the machinery of a music career rewards what merely looks like faith from the outside. None of that required a microphone or a stage, and in certain ways it meant more to him than anything he had done in front of a crowd, because what he was giving had a permanence that a single concert could never carry. Angie spoke to Guy's fans with the directness and warmth that have always defined how she moves through the world. She thanked them for the letters they had written over the years of silence and for the prayers they had offered, without knowing whether anyone was receiving them. She told them that Guy had read many of those messages himself, and that the kindness in them had genuinely moved him. She asked for understanding, and offered in return an honesty that was worth more than any explanation, reminding his audience that public figures remain human, regardless of how many years they have lived publicly, and that choosing not to share everything is not dishonesty, but sometimes the dignity of protecting what matters most until the right time to speak arrives. The picture she drew of who Guy is now, at 61 years old, is not a picture of someone reduced or diminished. His faith runs deeper than it did before. His marriage to Angie is closer and more grounded than it has ever been. His sense of purpose no longer depends on applause or visibility to sustain itself, and he has found, in the slower rhythm of a life built differently, that it never actually needed to. The gospel music that shaped his career and defined his public identity was never about the stages or the crowds. It was always about what the music carried inside it, and that has not changed by a single measure. Angie ended her message with 6 words that captured everything their journey had come to mean. Fame may fade, but faith remains. In those words lives the complete story of a man who gave his voice to the world for 30 years and then found the rare courage to give it back to himself,